Welcome to Turning the Tide. This is Candace Salima coming at you from the heart of the Rocky Mountains. And we are visiting today with Ben Cohen, who is a national author and who is able to, he's a specialist in the Middle East. He's a journalist that deals with everything going on there. And Ben, why don't you tell us everyone you write for? You're so, I know we're through PJTV, but you write for the National Review Online too, right?
No, I don't write for the National Review. I write for PJ Media. I've written for the New York Post, for Fox News, for the Huffinton Post, for the Jewish Week, the Jerusalem Post, different number of and range of publications.
Okay, all right. Well, that's every time I look, it seems like I think there is another Ben Cohen out there that confuses me when I'm trying to differentiate which ones you write and what they do. So I'm glad that you clarified that. Ben, welcome to Turning the Tide.
It's good to be here, Candace.
Oh, I'm grateful that you took the time out of the middle week between Christmas and New Year's. I know it's a week that people hold sacrosanct to, for spending time with family and stuff. So thanks for doing that. Now, we had in Nigeria on Christmas Day, there were terrorist attacks across the nation at Christian churches, and several people died. And we wanted to talk about that today. Ben, can you tell us what happened?
Well, what happened on Christmas Day probably ranks as the worst atrocity perpetrated against a church in Nigeria in modern times. But I think that this conflict that you're seeing there is something that has been building over several years. The sense is that Christians and Muslims largely coexist together very well in Nigeria. But on the Muslim side, you have an increasing tendency towards extremism. Now, the country, which is in West Africa, is divided between a largely Christian south and a largely Muslim north. And the group that is carrying out these attacks is based in the north of the country. Now, the name of the group is called Boko Haram, which is a mix of the local language, the African language, and the Arabic language. The word haram in Arabic means forbidden. I understand that Boko means Western, and the group basically is called Against Western Education.
Oh, yeah, that, because that's too enlightening, I'm sure.
Right, exactly. So, and this is the group that had planted a bomb in a Catholic church in Abuja on Christmas Day, and in two other churches around the country. And obviously through those three explosions, there's talk of around 30 dead, possibly higher. The exact casualty figures have not been released yet.
Ben, may I ask if it was all Catholic churches, or was it just Christian churches across the board?
I think it was Christian churches across the board, and actually the Christian Association of Nigeria, which is an umbrella group, so that includes Catholics, Protestants, Pentecostalists. They have issued they have come together under one umbrella, and their Secretary General I've seen today has issued a warning that Nigeria could descend into a religious war, into a war between Christians and Muslims, if these attacks, if these atrocities against Christian churches continue.
Well, do you know, I interviewed a gentleman named David Rubin, who was the former mayor of Shiloh, Israel. He lives in Israel right now, still in Shiloh, which I guess in Israel said Shiloh.
Shiloh, yeah.
Yes, sir. But he talked about how it is getting to the point with what's going on in Bethlehem and Jerusalem, and now even emerging in Nazareth. He specifically said that Islam is now targeting Christianity as a whole. What is your opinion on that?
I think it's certainly true that Islamist groups, and these are by far the most powerful, the most confident, and the most dominant groups emerging in the Islamic world, are now more confident about targeting Christians. There is no question about that. Look, you have, I think, about 100 million Christians, Candace, around the world who live with varying degrees of persecution. Now, some of them you'll find in countries that are not Muslim. China is a very obvious example of what I mean. North Korea, two communist countries where Christians are persecuted horribly. But I think that where you find Christian populations living in Muslim countries, and that can be anywhere from Nigeria through to Egypt, through to Iran, you will invariably find that those Christian communities are suffering persecution, that they are being targeted by extremists, and that frequently there is very little, there may be a cosmetic difference between the authorities and these extremist groups, but there isn't a very real one.
Well, and then here's my question then. How are we to combat this? With what is going on and the people that are dying, and for instance, in Nigeria, the LDS Church, which everyone knows that I'm a Latter-day Saint, also known as a Mormon, the Nigerian temple, as I understand it, has now been closed down, which for that to happen in a country, Ben, you have no idea what the church will put up with before they will do that. That is like a last resort. And so I am wondering, is Nigeria already to the point of a religious war, or are they still just this side of it?
No, I think right now they are on just this side of it, as you put it. I think it's terrible when you see houses of worship being closed down, but I think
it's horrible.
Those are preemptive measures, and the primary responsibility of anyone doing security is going to be to the congregation of that building. So hopefully these are all temporary closures, and these houses of worship will open soon. But I think it speaks to a wider point of what measures can be taken to prevent a sort of an intercommunal, interreligious conflict from breaking out.
Okay, let's talk about those.
Yeah.
What can be done to prevent it from occurring?
Well, in my view, a number of things can be done. I think, firstly, this is a decision the communities themselves have to take. But I think we have to accept that the principle of self-defense is valid here, and that Christians in countries where the authorities are either not able to protect them or not willing to protect them, or some mixture of both of those, have the right to defend themselves, have the right to defend their families, their community, their houses of worship, their schools, and so forth. So I think we need to establish that right of self-defense. I think, secondly, we need to do everything that we can politically to make sure that these conflicts don't worsen. Now, in that sense, there is a huge responsibility here on Western governments. I think Western governments need to be doing more. The United States needs to be clearly identifying this problem, clearly speaking out against it, and making sure that it's understood that there will be costs, political costs, economic costs, to allowing Christian communities to be persecuted.
And yet Barack Obama, the White House, the statement that they issued was so bland.
Yes, it's absolutely weak, because we have a White House now that has basically made it a policy not to identify Islamic terrorism as Islamic terrorism. So therefore, you basically drain it of any significance. It looks just like one more criminal act, as opposed to something that is religiously or ideologically motivated. And I think that is a deeply regrettable situation, that we have an administration that is not able to grab this particular bull by the horns, because it's not just in Nigeria that we're seeing this. We're seeing this actually and acutely in Egypt. Egypt is in some ways a better example than Nigeria, because there is a clear, the United States has taken a clear interest in the political process in Egypt. We saw over this year momentous events which led to the overthrow of President Mubarak, the so-called Arab Spring emerging, and now we've had elections in Egypt. And in those elections, the two groups that have come out trumps, the two groups that have topped the list, are the Muslim Brotherhood and the more extreme Salafi faction, Muslim faction.
And yet that's the side that the White House chose.
Right, and also it is the side. I mean, the point is that you have had throughout this year Candace, as you know, attacks on Coptic churches in Egypt. Now, these are the people who are essentially carrying out these attacks. They are the progeny of the Muslim Brotherhood or the fellow travelers of the Muslim Brotherhood. There might be some doctrinal differences here or there, but ultimately, this kind of political Islam, this sort of Islamic extremism, does not accept that religious minorities have the right to practice their religions free and their beliefs free from harassment. So I think Nigeria is a test for the US administration, certainly, but I think Egypt is an even bigger test because we have already seen what's happened with Coptic churches here, and we've not really seen any response either from the White House or the Europeans to make Egyptians and indeed the new Egyptian government understand that there is a clear political cost to allowing these sorts of things to happen. Same with Iraq, by the way, Candace, where we have just withdrawn, where there is a big Christian community, and over the years since the US overthrew Saddam Hussein, we've seen the continuing exodus of Iraqi Christians, and we've seen terrorist attacks against Iraqi Christian targets.
It is horrific what is going on, and the silence from the White House, because that's what it's been, other than to support the Muslim Brotherhood and all its factions which have been born of it, has been horrifying in my eyes. This is not what America is about. This is not who we are, and it is not what we are. We stand for truth. We stand for freedom, and we do not stand for terrorism, and yet that seems to be what our White House and his administration, Barack Obama's administration, have been doing. And in the meantime, as you say, Christians across the world, especially on the African continent and in the Middle East, are being persecuted to the point of death for their beliefs. And I do not believe that this administration, Ben, will ever take a stand against that.
And I'm afraid to say, I wish I could disagree with you, Candace, but I see precious.
I wish you could too.
I see precious little evidence that they are going to do something, and so I want to put this in terms that somebody who supports the Obama administration might be able to understand, because I don't think that this should be an issue of left or right, Democrat or Republican. I think what we're dealing with here, as I said before, is 100 million Christians who, to varying degrees around the world, are being prevented from freely practicing their religion. Now, you don't have to be a believer to understand that that is wrong, that it is a fundamental violation of civil rights. And my hope is that this issue of Christian persecution around the world can become the next big motivating issue here in the Western world. We've had so many motivating issues over the years. We had apartheid in South Africa, if you remember, during the 70s and 80s.
Yes, I do remember.
That was a huge mobilizing, galvanizing issue. We had, of course, the campaign for the freedom of Soviet Jews, Jews imprisoned in the Soviet Union. And that also, it captured the public hearts and minds. We've had since then all sorts of domestic and international issues that have galvanized the public. I think that this issue of 100 million Christians being persecuted around the world is of the same scale and the same import as those issues I mentioned previously. And I think that's what we have to be getting across the government. And again, it doesn't matter if you're going to vote for Obama or you're going to vote for one of the GOP candidates. This is something that we can unite around in a non-partisan way. And I think that the issue here, it's non-partisanship for freedom of worship. That's all we're asking for. Now,
it really is. And let me ask this question before you continue that. There are those of these GOP candidates who are saying that Barack Obama has declared war on religion, on Christianity. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't think it's fair to say that he has declared war on Christianity. I think that he is bringing it back to the specific issue that we're discussing here, which are these attacks on Christian communities in the Middle East and elsewhere. I think that what Barack Obama has done is to essentially allow those who are doing the attacking to think that there is no political or other cost to carrying out these atrocities. So
no
I don't
consequences,
I don't think that he has declared war, but I think that his policies have enabled these attacks to take place with greater confidence, with even more brazenness. Because I think that when you don't stand up to something that is clearly evil as this is, you encourage it. You basically create the impression that you're not going to act against it. And I think that is the White House has sent out a very feeble message to Africa and to the Middle East and to those Christian communities, that we may disapprove of what's being done to you, but don't count on us to actually step in and do anything meaningful that could stop it.
And that is what is really sad. I certainly don't believe we should be the world's policemen. I never have believed that. However, when Christians, actually any religious faith, is being persecuted so viciously, we should stand on the right side of that. Just like we should be standing very strongly with Israel now.
Exactly. And I think that, look, there are all sorts of excuses that one can make, and some of them will sound reasonable. I mean, in the case of Nigeria, the Nigerian government, the head of which is Chief Jonathan, good luck Jonathan, is somebody that is pro-American. We would not seek to sanction the Nigerian authorities. So there is a reasonable question: what can you do in these situations? Who are you going to target? I think in these situations, it's even more important for the world to understand what it is that you think. And I think that a simple declaration from the Obama administration, a simple recognition that the specific problem of Islamic extremist terrorism that is committed in the name of Islam, that they understand that is a major, major factor now for Christians around the world. That could simply be all that we're looking for. And it's very, very depressing that this White House doesn't want to acknowledge that even just this linguistic concession could actually do a lot to make people understand, to make those vulnerable Christians understand that the White House is sensitive to what is going on here.
Well, and the thing that is the saddest for me, Ben, is that America has always been on the side of right, has always been on the side of those who are downtrodden. And for the first time in our history, we are no longer. It seems to me that has been a very clear message from the White House, that they are very specific as to who they will help and who they will not. And now we have got Nigeria being attacked across the nation on Christmas Day. We have Christians being attacked, as we said. And what is Nigeria itself doing? Do they have any kind of military that isn't corrupt?
Well, that's the point, I think, is that Nigeria, like many countries in West Africa, is cursed by tribalism. And therefore, it's very hard for the authorities to launch internal military operations that don't look like it's one ethnic group persecuting another ethnic group. And actually, as far back as the 1960s, Nigeria had a terrible civil war over the Biafra region. So these things are not unprecedented in modern Nigeria's history. So I think that now what happens is that in places like northern Nigeria, you get these vacuums of authority, and those vacuums get filled by groups like this Boko Haram Islamist group. So I think the key issue is, it's not how are you going. It's fanciful to believe that you can eradicate Boko Haram from Nigerian life. I think what you have to do is to minimize the effect that it has, and that chiefly means, I think, protecting those churches. But essentially, what this points to is a stalemate, and I think that is why this stalemate that exists in Nigeria, where Christians can never be 100% sure that their security is guaranteed, is what is leading them to leave Nigeria, as they are leaving other countries in the Muslim world, because nobody can guarantee their security.
Well, and that's the sad part, and I really do think every Judeo-Christian nation left in the world needs to open their arms and embrace those Christians that are fleeing, so that I don't really know how to say this without being really, really harsh, but Islam does not allow for the practice of any other religion, period. Therefore, they have to be sent back to the Middle East, and they can go back to killing each other and leave the rest of us alone.
Well, I think, look, I don't think that one should exchange charity to Christian refugees by maltreating or deporting Muslims living in the West who haven't committed crimes. I mean, I think we have to make sure that we maintain our own values here, and the key value that we have, I think, in our society is that somebody is innocent until proven otherwise.
And that is very, very true. But even in our own neighborhoods, honor killings are rising. All these things are going on here in America now, too. So where do we draw the line, Ben? Where do we make people understand that if you come to America, you will abide under the law written out in the U.S. Constitution? How do we make them understand that?
Well, listen. If you look at the experience that Europe has had, you'll see that this is a very tough prospect.
It is.
I think the key challenge that policymakers have here is how do you deal with the rampant extremism in these communities without criminalizing the entire community? I think that has been really the great moral and political test for those of us who don't want to do what the Obama administration has done, and that is shove our heads in the sand, but equally don't want to regard every Muslim as equally suspect.
Well, and I can't. I have an uncle who's Muslim, and so
I mean, I think that we have to, in a sense, before we focus on that question, that the more urgent one is what do we do about fleeing Christians? I agree with you. I think that they should be welcomed with open arms wherever they turn up. But I also think that we should not be communicating to those Muslim extremists the sense that it's fine for you to bomb them out of their churches and their homes and their villages because we'll take them in. I think we need some sort of more muscular response, because we cannot allow the idea that non-Muslims have no right to live freely in Muslim countries to become a sort of common sense idea. And I'm afraid that's what we'll do if we have a sort of passive policy of accepting refugees. We've got to do everything we can to keep those communities strong and rooted in countries that they are just as legitimately claim to be natives of as their Muslim neighbours. And I think that goes hand in hand with fighting Muslim extremism in our own communities.
Well, let me ask this. Of the GOP contenders, which do you believe would be best able to do that? To recognize the problem of Muslim extremism?
Here in America, it's a tough one to answer because none of them really have the sort of the national security experience that you would expect them to have in order to make an informed judgment. I do think Newt Gingrich understands this problem, and I do think that Mitt Romney understands this problem, and I think that both of them understand it from having experience of governing, from having knowledge of history, and from recognizing that the sort of politically correct practices of the Obama White House, which is basically kind of putting all political violence in one basket and not making a difference between Muslim violence and other kinds of ideologically motivated violence. I think Gingrich and Romney understand best how problematic that is.
Okay, well, and then speaking of that specific thing...
And by the way, I think the person who has the worst understanding is Ron Paul.
Oh, I'm with you on that one. Believe me.
If there is one candidate in a GOP who should be wearing the banner of jihadism, it's Ron Paul.
I have to agree, Ben.
So there you go. So we move on from Mr. Paul.
Yeah. That was what I was talking about today. Someone was saying, if you had to choose between Barack Obama and Ron Paul, who would you choose? I'm like, the communist versus the nut job. Tough choice, but I'd have to go with the nut job. Maybe. I don't know. That would be a horrible choice.
It would be a horrible choice. I tell you, I mean, I would not cast my vote, but I would certainly not cast my vote for Ron Paul under any conditions. I think, look, in terms of what we're discussing here, which is the persecution of Christians.
He's very dangerous.
Right, because Ron Paul is the kind of... Many people have asked Ron Paul what he would have done had he been president in World War II. And his response, partly because he is an anti-Semite, he doesn't like Jews, was to say, well, the Second World War was fought for the Jews, and that's none of our business. Okay, fine. We know where he stands. So 6 million Jews being murdered by the Nazis was none of his business. By the same token, he will say that those 100 million Christians who are facing persecution around the world, and those hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Christians who are facing death, persecution, torture, imprisonment imminently from Nigeria through Egypt to Iraq, they're none of his business either. That we don't need that kind of isolationism.
We not only don't need it, he has a very, very distorted view of history, because World War II was not just fought for the Jews.
No, it was fought in spite of them, frankly. Yeah.
It was fought because a madman tried to take over the world and enforce his horrific ideology on the world, and Jews got caught up in that, and everyone was horrified by that, and it became a combined purpose. But he tried to take over the world.
Right, but I think the key lesson here is I mean, one of the things that Islamists and Nazis have in common is that they both see the Jews at the center of the world. They see Jewish conspiracies everywhere. So Hitler, actually, there are a lot of similarities between Hitler and some of the Muslim leaders that we see winning elections in Egypt today, because they both subscribe to this idea that everything that happens in the world is the result of a Jewish plot. But I think in terms of somebody like Ron Paul or this administration, the issue is slightly more complicated. They believe that you can make deals with extremists. Ron Paul believes probably that he could have made a deal with Hitler, and that the Third Reich and the United States of America would have coexisted quite happily.
You can't reason with madmen.
Right.
You can't.
And
it's impossible.
But you have to remember that President Obama believes that as well. President Obama believes that he can ultimately coexist with what he identified as the Republic of Iran. I think he feels that he can coexist with the Muslim Brotherhood running most of North Africa.
So I have to ask you, which one is the mayor of Crazy Town, Obama or Paul?
I would say that Ron Paul has crazier tendencies, because he really does associate. I mean, he does kind of identify with conspiracy theories.
He does.
Whereas I have not seen Obama say, for example, that 9/11 was an inside job.
No, he hasn't said that. That is true.
And Ron Paul has strongly intimated that.
He flat out said it, man.
Yeah, he's flat out said it. And, so he doesn't... well, it depends what day of the week it is and who he's speaking to.
True, and true.
So when I criticize Obama, I criticize him because I don't like his policies, and I don't like the ideas that underpin those policies. But I would not misrepresent him as a lunatic or as a conspiracy theorist, which I think you can fairly do with Ron Paul.
You make a valid point there. Barack Obama, in my eyes, is one who does not like America and wants to, in his own words, fundamentally change it. And then you're right, Ron Paul's just crazy.
Yeah, and yes, exactly. And I think often the greatest test of your values is are you willing to stand up for people who are facing genocide and persecution? And I think with this administration, we have not got any clear evidence that they're willing to do that, particularly in the case of Christians.
Exactly.
And I think that they are so. What I fear, Candace, in all of this is that the Obama administration is so keen to ingratiate itself with Islamist forces like the Muslim Brotherhood that they're going to play down this issue, and this issue will actually become less and less important. So I was making the point before that this issue of Christian persecution could be a galvanizing issue for our age in much the same way that civil rights was in the 60s and apartheid in the 70s and 80s, all these other big causes that we've had. But it's got to come from the grassroots. It has to come from the people. People in this country have shown they're very good at engaging Occupy Wall Street. Fine, I'm not going to talk about occupy.
Okay, wait, Ben. Not people of this country. A few thousand people.
A few thousand people, fine. They have shown that they can be very effective. I'm saying now the silent majority should take this cause and make it their own.
I agree, and through you and David Rubin in Israel, I have really come to see the persecution of Christians in a far better light, meaning it is a brighter sight to me. I am able to see everything that is going on in the world against Christians. And so let me ask this next question.
Sure.
How do we make this the key issue here in the world today so that this type of persecution can stop? The Jews should not be persecuted. The Christians should not be persecuted. Plain and simple. No one should be persecuted.
I think you've got to set milestones and targets. I'll tell you something, Candace. What I think will have made some progress here is if between now and the election in 2012, at any one town hall meeting, at any public engagement that the candidate of either party is present, we got to ask them this question. Specific, because none of them have been asked it so far. I don't recall this issue coming up in any of the GOP debates. I don't recall President Obama ever having dealt with a direct question from a member of the public. We have to get our people who our co-thinkers out there asking the candidates, are you aware of the persecution of Christians in countries ranging from Nigeria to China? If you are, what are you going to do about it? What are your 3 top priorities for dealing with this issue? Let's get that question out there. I think part of the key point of raising awareness is you have to get people discussing the issue. And that is what I find so tragic right now, is that people aren't discussing this issue. This is not an issue that has established itself in the American public square in the way that it should have done.
Well, and I think that in 2012 is where we can make that change, Ben.
Yeah.
This, to me, 2012 in America is a historical year. We are going to, at this point in history, decide whether we're going to remain as a republic or become a socialist democracy, or go right to where Obama wants it, which is communism, because he's a self-avowed Marxist. Now, that is the choice we're going to make. Should we choose, which I pray and hope happens, the republic stands, then part of that is making sure that freedom of religion exists wherever we can make it so. Exactly.
And I think that has to be, because that is a key point for civilization today. Religion is one of those issues where the world hangs in the balance on something like religion. And, none of us want to see a civil war in Nigeria. Equally, I don't feel that any of us are in a position to say to Christians there, you know what, just hang tight, don't overreact. They have to decide what level of self-defense is appropriate for them. So yes, I think by having more public discussion on this and challenging the candidates, presidential candidates, senatorial candidates, go out and seek meetings with state senators, with your local mayor. Ask them what they are doing about this issue. And it could be as something as minimal as simply making a public statement. I also think you need to have a stronger approach within the churches. I would say that that the response of the Catholic Church and the response of most of the Protestant denominations has been really quite disappointing. There's still too much focus on what Israel is supposedly doing, and not enough focus on what is actually happening in Muslim countries. So I think strengthen the church leadership on this issue and make them speak out. And I also think that it's something that we need to be educating our kids about too, because it's a great way to introduce kids to the issue of freedom of worship as a core fundamental value. And I think lastly, you say, Candace, that 2012 is going to be a very important year. I think that this issue is something that can also bring Jews and Christians closer together. When I have worked on this issue, and I'm working on this with Jewish and Christian colleagues, I think those of us who are Jewish really understand why those Christians who get it react in the way that they do, why they see this as a sort of existential threat. Because this sort of persecution has followed us around through history. So I actually think that, horrible as it is, there is also an opportunity here for Christians and Jews to work more closely together and begin to really help each other with their respective agendas.
Well, Ben, you and I are going to be working on this together, and you're
Absolutely.
Jewish, and I am Christian.
Absolutely.
So certainly, I want to have you on often throughout 2012 so that we can make sure this is still spotlighted and highlighted.
And
my listenership, go ahead.
I'll be happy to do that, Candace.
Thank you, Ben, because my listenership is growing daily, and it is now coast to coast, and this is something that I think is absolutely critical, more so than it has ever been in the history of the world. This is a point of time where we can stop it before it gets as bad as it got in World War II again.
Right, and I think it's not unhelpful to think in those terms, Candace.
Yeah, it is that critical. I have not forgotten the lessons of my father. I have not forgotten the lessons of my own church's history and points of time here, even in America, where we were not allowed to worship according to the dictates of our own consciences. And this is something that has to be, it is a core constitutional principle, the freedom of religion. And it was set forth by the Founding Fathers specifically because of what they had experienced in their own lives in other nations. And it is something that we have to stand for. And the Bill of Rights here in America has been under attack. I don't think anyone can deny that. And the most under attack have been 1 and 2 and 4. And this is something that we have got to stand tall and stand strong for. We cannot allow the Bill of Rights, which is inviolate. No one in the federal government is allowed to trod on those rights granted us by the U.S. Constitution and through the Constitution through God. And this is something that we have to stand for. And if Jews and Christians do not unite on this matter, I don't know that we can win.
No, I agree with you. I think there is a cluster of very complex domestic and international issues here. But I think the message of freedom of worship is something that you will get Jews and Christians and many Muslims as well. There are many Muslims who are not happy with what is going on in the Islamic world. That's actually why a lot of Muslims choose to leave the Muslim world. So I think the broadest possible coalition we can get here, certainly the better.
Okay, and so let me ask this question because you're the most conversant on this. Can moderate Muslims understand that if they live here in America, that the U.S. Constitution supersedes anything else?
You know, I think that you can't make generalizations. I think a lot of them do understand that. I think as somebody who's lived in both America and Europe, I've been impressed with the way that this country, the United States, has done a much better job of integrating its Muslim immigrants relative to Europe. They tend to, for example, they work in higher paying professions. They're encouraged to join the middle class. They have basically, many of them, benefited from the very same American dream that Occupy Wall Street seems to have such contempt for. But I think one of the reasons that you've had comparative lack of Islamic extremism in America when compared to Europe is because America's social values and its emphasis on doing things for yourself and self-improvement, that has penetrated Muslim immigrants just as it's penetrated other immigrant communities. I think
that is good to hear.
But I think at the same time, that clearly if there is one community in America that is more vulnerable to extremism than any other, it's the Muslim community. And I think that we have to have, for example, I know that there are people in law enforcement who complain that they're not getting enough cooperation from leaders of local mosques, for example. If those leaders want to root out extremism, then they have to engage in better cooperation with the authorities. I think at the same time, you need to make sure with Muslim immigrants and other immigrants that there is sufficient, that people are sufficiently conversant with American history, with American moral values, that those moral values are being taught. Belatedly, this is something they've started doing in Europe now. And I think we should not be frightened of saying to people, we should not be intimidated by an accusation, say, of racism, to say to somebody, look, you know what? You don't want to live here. You don't like our values. Go back to where you came from. No one's forcing you to stay here.
Exactly.
I apply that logic to myself. I'm a Brit that moved here. You know, I still find it hard to figure out baseball, but hey, you know, I'm in America now, so.
Well, you know what? I'm not. I love baseball to a degree, but I'm a football fan. American football, not British football.
And I have to say, well, I watch both. You see, I watch soccer and I watch football. Is a great game. That's something that I have converted to since I arrived here. Baseball, unfortunately, I don't think I'll ever figure that out. But
you know what? It's a lot of fun to play. It's not a lot of fun to watch, in my opinion. You know, and I married a football player, so, there you go.
So there you go. All right, Candace.
All right, Ben, thank you so much for taking the time today. Is there any last thing you would like to say to the listeners of Turning the Tide?
Yeah, I would, because we didn't discuss it, but very briefly, because I've got to run. Listeners, guys, ladies and gentlemen, please keep an eye out and an ear out for news of Pastor Yusuf Nadakani in Iran.
Yes.
Candace and I have discussed him in the past. He is an Iranian pastor that has been a Christian pastor that is facing the death sentence in Iran. The latest news on him is a bit odd, that they have yet again, the Iranian regime the Iranian judiciary has basically told the local court, the court that's deciding in Pastor Nadakani's case, to again postpone a verdict. So we don't know whether he's going to be charged with apostasy. We don't know whether he's going to be executed. We don't know if he's going to be given a heavy sentence or a light sentence. We don't know. The one thing that we do know is that when Pastor Nadakani's case first came to light, there was a massive public outcry around the world, and especially here in the United States. I think that is what actually put the Iranian regime on the defensive. And I think if we have bad news, if we hear bad news again, in the case of Pastor Nadakani, we can again make them back down. But there's no substitute for being preemptive. So I would just encourage everybody listening, Google that name, Pastor Nadakani, Nadarkhani. Google that once or twice a week. Just find out what's going on.
There's not a lot out there, Ben. And in case anyone needs to know, his first name is Yosef. It's Youcef, and then last name Nadarkhani, as Ben spelled out for you. I Google every single week. There is not a lot of information, and I very much would like to see someone in our government dedicated to getting that man released and he and his family out of that country.
Absolutely. And I think that is something, again, Candace, we could put that to one of the GOP candidates. I think we have special envoys in this country that the State Department appoints. Yes. The Jewish community, for example, benefited greatly from having a special envoy dealing with restitution issues in Europe after the Second World War. I think one of the things we should be saying to Romney, to Gingrich, to everybody in the GOP except Ron Paul, and also to President Obama is, are you going to appoint a special envoy for persecuted Christians?
You know, that is a great idea, Ben. Everyone out there listening to Turning the Tide, that is something I would very much like you to do. Now, earlier Ben mentioned he wanted us to ask, of the candidates, are you aware of the persecution of Christians from the African continent to China? If so, what are you going to do about it? And then here's the other part. Are you going to appoint a special envoy to deal with Christian persecution worldwide? In the meantime, I think I will call my own senator, Mike Lee, Ben, and see what he can do to help Pastor Nadarkhani.
Absolutely. And I'm on hand, Candace. Whatever I can do to offer assistance, I'm happy to do. But let me wish you, I hope you had a good Christmas, and let me wish you a Happy New Year and a Happy Hanukkah as well.
And Happy Hanukkah to you as well. Happy New Year, and God bless, Ben. I very much appreciate you always taking the time.
Lovely to speak. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.